The glass lobby of Reconciling Logistics glowed like a cathedral of money that morning, and Dante Mercer had barely finished saying he had a 9 o'clock appointment when Serafina Vale turned to her security detail and ended the conversation for him. She did not glance at the email on his phone. She did not ask why a 6-year-old girl was pressed against his leg, clutching a worn cotton rabbit with one eye sewn back on. One look at the scuffed backpack and the polished but tired shoes, and she decided he did not belong. 10 minutes later, staring at his name on a confidential file in her own boardroom, she would be running across that same lobby, calling after him. 5 hours earlier, Dante Mercer had been ironing the collar of a white dress shirt in the narrow kitchen of a third-floor walk-up in Queens, trying not to wake the little girl curled under a patchwork blanket on the couch. The apartment was small, but it was clean. Every mug in the drying rack matched. Every pair of shoes by the door was polished, even the ones his daughter had outgrown and refused to part with. That kind of order did not happen by accident. It happened because a man who had lost almost everything had decided that the things he could still control would not be allowed to slip. Ivy Mercer was 6 years old, small for her age, with hair the color of wet autumn leaves and a quiet way of watching the world that often unsettled adults. She had been sick the week before, a low fever that left her pale and clingy, and Dante had carried her to bed every night with a cup of warm water balanced in his other hand. That morning, she woke slowly, blinking at the soft light through the kitchen curtains, and asked where they were going. He told her the truth. He had an interview, an important one. She nodded like she understood, because she did. The babysitter had called at 12 minutes past 6. Her mother had been taken to the hospital in New Jersey, and she was already on the road. She was sorry. She was so sorry. Dante told her not to worry about a thing. He hung up, set the phone down carefully on the counter and stared at it for a long moment. Then he started making breakfast. Scrambled eggs with a little milk. Toast cut into triangles because Ivy liked triangles better than squares. He gave himself exactly 90 seconds to consider canceling, and then he stopped considering it. He had been out of steady work for almost 11 months. Before that, before his wife had died in a car accident on a stretch of highway outside Hartford 2 winters ago, he had been a regional operations lead at a mid-sized logistics firm. He'd been good at it. More than good. He had a strange, quiet talent for staring at 1,000 rows of shipping data and feeling, somewhere behind his eyes, when a number was lying to him. He had saved one firm in the Midwest roughly $40 million when he spotted a subtle routing pattern a third-party contractor had been using to skim fuel reimbursements. He had not asked for a bonus. He had asked for 2 weeks off to take his wife to the coast. 6 months later, she was gone. Grief did not let him keep his old life. The job required travel, long hours, the kind of cognitive availability he simply did not have anymore, not with a 4-year-old asking every night whether mommy was watching from the stars. So he had stepped back. He had taken contract work, piecemeal consulting, anything he could do from a laptop while Ivy napped on the couch. When the contracts dried up, he had let them dry. He had chosen her over his career without ever once calling it a sacrifice, because he did not believe it was one. But the bills did not care what a man chose. The bills came anyway. He had applied to Reconciling Logistics 3 weeks ago. The posting was for a senior operations analyst, and when he had read the job description, he had felt something he had not felt in a long time, which was the faint, unmistakable click of a door that was meant to open. The interview had been scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. A human resources coordinator named Margaret had sent him a warm confirmation email and told him to bring copies of his references. Everything had been set. He put Ivy's shoes on her feet while she ate her toast. He braided her hair loose and soft the way her mother used to do it. He packed a coloring book, 2 granola bars, and her rabbit, whose name was Mr. Button, into a small canvas bag. He told her that if she got bored in the lobby, she could draw him a picture of anything she wanted. She asked if she was allowed to draw the ceiling. He told her the ceiling was an excellent subject. He did not say any of this to make anyone feel sorry for him. He did not say it at all. On his resume, the gap between his last full-time position and the present day was listed with 2 flat words: family care. No story. No explanation. No plea. A man who had learned the hard way that the worst thing you could do with your own grief was trade it for someone else's pity. By 20 minutes to 8, they were on the subway. Serafina Vale was 27 years old, and she was running the company her father had built out of a single warehouse in 1984. On paper, she was brilliant. On paper, she had earned every title she held. In practice, she was also exhausted in a way she never allowed herself to name, because the board that had handed her the chief executive's chair after her father's stroke had done so with the unspoken understanding that she was on probation. Every quarter, every meeting, every breath. Reconciling Logistics was in trouble that spring, though most of its employees did not yet understand how much. Shipping margins were slipping. A handful of regional routes were losing money for reasons nobody in operations could cleanly explain. Inventory audits had started producing tiny but persistent discrepancies, small enough to dismiss individually, large enough in aggregate to worry the quiet men at Helix Capital, who held the note on Auraline's bridge financing. A meeting had been scheduled for that morning at 9:30 in the boardroom on the 42nd floor, at which the partners of Helix would decide whether to continue extending capital, restructure the terms, or begin the slow and ugly process of walking away. Serafina had not slept well. She had stood in front of her closet at 5:30 that morning and chosen a cream-colored dress with a tailored V-neck, because she wanted to look like a woman who was calm enough to dress in cream on the day her company's future was being decided. She had rehearsed her opening remarks in the mirror while brushing her teeth. She had told herself, as she did every morning, that weakness was a language her company could not afford to speak, not now, not to anyone. At 10 minutes before 8, Clinton Harrow had called her in the car. Clinton was the company's chief financial officer, a man of perhaps 50, silver at the temples, with the kind of low, reassuring voice that made investors relax on phone calls. He had come up through the firm under her father, and for most of her first year as chief executive, he had been the person she trusted most inside the building. That morning, he told her that Helix was nervous. He told her that whatever happened in the meeting, the most important thing was that she present an image of total control. He said, very gently, that days like this one had a way of surfacing small distractions that felt urgent in the moment and looked foolish in retrospect. He said, almost in passing, that she should let her floor handle its own messes, because the partners at Helix would be watching for any crack. She had thanked him. She had hung up. She had not realized, because she had no reason to realize, that Clinton Harrow had been the one who, the previous evening, had quietly asked a junior administrator in the human resources workflow to remove a certain confirmation email from the shared scheduling queue, because he did not want a certain name to appear on her calendar, in her building, on this particular day. When the car pulled up to Auraline Tower at 20 minutes to 9, she stepped out into the cold, bright air and walked straight through the glass doors with her assistant trailing behind her. Clinton joined her inside, murmuring something about the agenda, and the three of them crossed the marble floor toward the executive elevator bank. She was not looking for trouble. She was looking for the elevator. She was looking for the next 70 minutes of her life to be clean. Which is why, when she heard the soft, careful voice at the reception desk insisting that yes, there was an appointment, yes, he had the email right here, she turned her head with the particular impatience of a woman who has been told all morning that her day must go smoothly. And she saw a man with a small girl holding his hand. The receptionist, a young woman named Hannah, who had been at Auraline for 4 months, was trying to help. She could see that the man was telling the truth. She could see the email on his phone screen, the sender address ending in Auraline, the timestamp from 3 weeks earlier. She could also see that the scheduling system in front of her was not showing his appointment in the day's queue. She had asked him politely, to wait a moment while she called up to Human Resources. She had smiled at the little girl. She had complimented the rabbit. Dante had said thank you. He had stepped back from the desk so he was not blocking the line. He had crouched down next to Ivy to straighten the strap of her bag. He was good at being patient in lobbies. He had done it many times over the past year. Serafina stopped 3 steps from the elevator and turned. She took in the scene in less than 4 seconds. She saw a tall man in a white shirt that was clean but not new. She saw shoes that had been polished so many times the leather had gone a shade lighter at the toes. She saw a canvas backpack with a small tear near the zipper. She saw a child with a stuffed rabbit pressed against her collarbone. She saw her own receptionist, whose job was to protect the executive floor, looking unsure. And she saw, in her head, the meeting upstairs, the partners at Helix, the gray silence of the boardroom, the look her father used to get when something sloppy came into his lobby. She walked toward the desk. "Is there a problem?" she said. It was not a question. Hannah straightened. She said carefully that the gentleman had an appointment with Margaret in recruiting, but the system was not showing it, and she was about to call upstairs to confirm. Serafina did not glance at the phone the man was holding out. She looked at him directly, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry across the marble floor, that Oraline was not a place to bargain with personal hardship. Dante blinked once. He did not move. He did not raise his voice. He said, very quietly, that he had an email from Margaret Ashford dated the 14th, and that he was happy to wait outside if there had been a scheduling error, but that he had not come here to bargain for anything. He said he had come to interview for a posted position. Serafina heard the calm in his voice and, for reasons she would later spend a long time trying to unpack, it irritated her. She was used to the other kind. The kind that pleaded. The kind that postured. She did not know what to do with a man who answered her like that, and because she did not know, she did what she had trained herself to do when she did not know. She moved faster. She said, still not looking at the phone, that the executive lobby was not a place to use a child as a prop. The words landed the way a stone lands in shallow water, with the sound everyone in the lobby heard. 2 women in the elevator line stopped talking. A man near the door lowered his newspaper. Hannah's face, behind the desk, went a very specific shade of pale. Dante did not answer. For a long moment, he simply looked at Serafina, and in that look, there was no anger, no plea, no performance. There was only the tired, clean expression of a man who had been told, in one way or another, many times in his life, that he did not belong in the room he had been invited into. He turned to Ivy. He put one hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "we should go." Ivy looked up at him. She looked at the tall woman in the cream dress. She looked at the security officer who had begun, almost apologetically, to step forward from his post by the elevator bank. "Daddy," she said, "are we in trouble?" The question was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the small, earnest, almost whispered voice of a child who had already seen too many grown-ups be unkind this year and was trying to understand whether it was happening again. Dante knelt down. He adjusted the ear of the rabbit. He said, "No, sweetheart. We are just leaving." Serafina's jaw tightened. She did not know why. She told the security officer, without looking away, to escort the gentleman out. The officer was named Ray. He had 3 grandchildren. He did not want to be doing this. He walked over with the slow, careful step of a man who hoped the man he was about to touch would not make him touch him. He did not need to worry. Dante stood up, took Ivy's hand, and began to walk toward the door on his own. They passed the receptionist. Hannah whispered, "I am so sorry," and Dante nodded at her, because he did not blame her, because he had been at the bottom of enough pecking orders in his life to know exactly who had made this decision and who had simply been standing there. The glass door opened. The cold air came in. Somewhere behind him, A man near the coffee station let out a short, nervous laugh, the way people laugh when they are uncomfortable and do not know what else to do. A woman in a gray suit pressed her lips together and looked directly at Serafina, and then, very deliberately, looked away. Serafina did not notice any of this. She was already turning back toward the elevator. She had a meeting. She had company. She had, she believed, just handled a small distraction cleanly. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. In the reflection of the polished steel, she caught, for 1/2 second, the sight of a small girl in a blue coat, holding the hand of her father, walking away. She pushed the image out of her mind before the elevator reached the 2nd floor. The 42nd floor of Oraline Tower was quiet in the way that only money can make a place quiet. The boardroom occupied the southeast corner. The glass wall overlooked the harbor. At 22 minutes past 9, the partners from Helix Capital were already seated, 3 of them, with their counsel beside them, and a 4th chair held for the man they had brought to sit in on the operational review. Serafina walked in at 25 minutes past 9 to ride. She sat down at the head of the table. She smiled the careful, professional smile she had practiced in the bathroom mirror. Clinton took the seat to her right. Her general counsel, a woman named Priscilla Dane, took the seat to her left. The lead partner of Helix was a man in his early 60s named Gerald Loomis. He had known her father for almost 30 years. He opened a slim folder in front of him. He slid it, face down, across the polished surface of the table, toward Serafina. He said gently that before they began, there was someone whose name he wanted on the record, because his firm had included him in the review as a condition of any further capital. Serafina reached for the folder. She turned it over. The name on the cover was printed in a small plain font. Dante Mercer. Serafina's hand did not move for several seconds. Her face did not change, because she had trained her face not to change, but underneath the cream dress, her heart had begun to do something very unwelcome. Across the table, Clinton Harrow, who had not been warned about this, reached for his water glass and took a careful, measured sip. "Who?" Serafina said, in a voice that she barely recognized. "Is Dante Mercer." Gerald Loomis leaned back in his chair. He said that Dante Mercer was, in his professional opinion, one of the most quietly capable operations analysts of his generation. He said that roughly 4.5 years earlier, Dante had been brought in as a consultant by a mid-size Midwestern firm that was hemorrhaging money through a routing scheme nobody on its own staff had been able to see. He said that Dante had isolated the pattern in 11 days. He said that since that case, his name had been quietly passed between 3 different boards as a person to call when something inside a logistics network started to feel choreographed rather than sloppy. He said that Oraline Logistics, over the past 11 months, had begun to feel choreographed. He said that when he had brought Dante's name to his counterpart at Helix the previous week, he had been surprised to discover that a senior analyst posting at Oraline had already independently been offered to him. Margaret Ashford in Human Resources had reached out. Dante had accepted a screening interview. It had been scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning. He said, and here he paused, because he was a courteous man, that he had been informed 20 minutes ago by Margaret herself that Dante had never made it to the interview floor. Serafina opened the folder. Inside was a printed memorandum on her father's personal letterhead, dated 3 years before his stroke. The handwriting at the bottom was his. She knew the slope of the N in his signature the way she knew the lines of her own palm. The memo was addressed to the eventual members of the board, and the last paragraph had been underlined, once, in pencil, by her father himself. It read, "If this company ever begins to bleed from the inside, bring in Dante Mercer before the board starts guessing." Below the memorandum was a printed copy of an email. A confirmation of an interview. Time-stamped. Sent from Margaret Ashford's account. Addressed to Dante Mercer. And below that, in a smaller typeface, an internal audit trail, the kind of administrative record Serafina had not even realized her own systems produced. showing that the confirmation had been removed from the shared morning queue at 11 minutes past 7 that same day by a junior human resources assistant, on instructions relayed through an internal chat from a senior executive whose access code matched the one currently assigned to the Serafina lifted her eyes from the folder. She did not look at Clinton. She did not trust herself yet to look at Clinton. She said quietly to Priscilla that she was going to step out for a moment. She stood up. Her legs were steady, which surprised her. She walked to the door. She did not look back at the Helix partners. She did not look back at her chief financial officer, whose hand was now wrapped around his water glass a little too tightly. She walked out of the boardroom. She walked past her assistant, who tried to speak to her. She walked past two startled associates in the hallway. She reached the elevator bank. She pressed the button. She pressed it again. The elevator was slow. She looked at her shoes. Then she turned and ran, in cream silk and 3-inch heels, toward the stairwell. The stairwell was concrete and echoing and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. Serafina had not used it in almost a year. She took the steps 2 at a time, one hand on the railing, the hem of her dress gathered in the other. She did not know what she was going to say when she caught him. She knew only that if he walked out of that lobby and kept walking, there was a version of the next hour in which her company did not survive, and a version of the next 10 years in which she did not forgive herself. Both versions were unacceptable. By the 18th floor, she had kicked off her right shoe. By the 14th, the left. She carried them in her hand. The stairwell camera would, later that afternoon, record the chief executive of Oraline Logistics running down 32 flights of stairs in bare feet, cream dress streaked with stairwell dust, hair coming loose from its pins. She burst out of the stairwell door into the lobby. Hannah, behind the reception desk, looked up and nearly dropped her phone. Serafina did not see her. She scanned the lobby. Her head turned left, right, left again. She took 3 running steps toward the glass door and pushed through it. The sidewalk outside Oraline Tower was busy in the way midtown sidewalks are always busy on a weekday morning. A yellow cab was pulling away from the curb. A woman with a stroller was crossing at the light, and 20 feet to her right, in front of a cast-iron planter, a tall man in a white shirt was adjusting his daughter's scarf. Serafina opened her mouth to call out, and her voice, for the first time in years, cracked. Mr. Mercer. Dante turned slowly. He did not look surprised. He had known somewhere that this moment was probably coming. He had not known when. He had been about to raise a hand for a cab. Ivy looked up at the tall woman with no shoes on, standing on the cold pavement, and her small face did a complicated thing that was half curiosity and half something older, something that understood this woman was the same woman from the lobby. Serafina stopped 3 feet from Dante. She could not for a moment speak. Then she said, very clearly, I was wrong. She did not say she was sorry yet. She did not start with a defense. She did not mention the pressure of the morning or the meeting upstairs or the man at Helix. She said the hardest sentence first, and she said it without any cushion, because she understood, with the clarity of a person who has just lost an argument with her own father through a piece of paper, that there was no cushion she could place under that sentence that would not make it smaller. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Are you apologizing? He said finally. Because you misjudged me, or because you just learned you need me? The question was not cruel. There was no triumph in it. He was asking because he wanted to know. Because he had spent the morning being the answer to a question nobody had bothered to ask him, and he was not willing to walk back through those glass doors without knowing which one it was. Serafina's throat moved. She held his eyes. Both, she said. But I should have known the first one long before the second one ever mattered. The wind blew a piece of her hair across her face. She did not reach to move it. Ivy, who had been looking back and forth between the two of them, tugged softly on her father's hand. He knelt down. She cupped her hand around his ear and whispered something. He listened. He nodded. Once. He stood up. "What did she say?" Serafina asked. Dante almost smiled. "Almost. She said I should go," he said, "if they are finally listening." Serafina did not smile back, because she did not yet feel that she had earned the right to. She only said quietly that if he would come back inside, he would come back as the man she had invited, not the one she had thrown out. She said she would walk him up herself. Dante looked at Ivy. He looked at the revolving door behind the woman who had, 12 minutes earlier, told him the lobby was no place for his daughter. He said, "All right." Hannah watched them come back through the glass door together, and something in her chest unknotted, because she had not yet found a way to forgive herself for what she had failed to prevent, and now, at least, she understood that there was going to be a path forward. The security officer named Ray stepped aside with his hands behind his back and looked, for a single second, directly at Dante, and Dante gave him a small nod. It was not absolution. It was something smaller and kinder. It was the acknowledgement that Ray had been standing in a building where the doors were controlled by other people, and that was not the same as being the one who closed them. Serafina did not take the public elevator. She took Dante and Ivy through the private one, the one keyed to the executive floors, and on the way up she asked her assistant, through the earpiece, to have a cup of warm water and a blanket brought to the small lounge outside the boardroom, because there was a child, and the child had been cold. Ivy was settled in the lounge with a quiet young woman from the executive office, a stack of blank printer paper, and a cup of cocoa with 2 marshmallows. Before Dante left her, he knelt down. "I will not be long," he said. "I know," Ivy said. She opened her coloring book without looking up. "Draw good." He did not know exactly what she meant. He decided to try to deserve it anyway. Serafina opened the boardroom door. The Helix partners rose slightly in their chairs when they saw who was behind her. Gerald Loomis did not rise. He simply looked at Dante across the long, polished table and said, in the mild, unassuming voice of a man who had been in too many rooms to be surprised by anything, "Mr. Mercer. Thank you for coming upstairs. I understand the morning has been eventful." Dante inclined his head. He did not sit at first. He walked the length of the table and looked down at the 3 spreadsheets that had been laid out in sequence at its center. He did not ask permission. He did not make a speech. He leaned over and looked. For almost 2 minutes, nobody in the room spoke. Clinton Harrow was the only person at the table who could not hold still. Dante straightened, finally, and tapped one finger on a column near the middle of the second spreadsheet. "This is not incompetence," he said. "It is choreography." Gerald Loomis's eyes narrowed, just slightly, with the look of a man who had been waiting 2 weeks to hear that exact sentence. Dante walked them through it, calmly, without raising his voice, the way a man who has spent his entire career reading shipping data explains the difference between noise and music. He pointed to 3 regional distribution centers where discrepancies had appeared in the past 9 months. He noted that none of them were centers that served weak markets, which was strange, because in his experience, losses tended to concentrate where margins were already thin. He pointed to a pattern in the routing logs, where certain high-volume shipments were being pushed through intermediate transfer hubs that added between 40 and 70 miles to their journey for no operational reason he could identify. He pointed to an inventory reporting pattern in which discrepancies were being split across 3 sub-accounts in amounts just small enough not to trigger the company's automated variance alerts. He said that each of those adjustments required an approval, and each of those approvals carried a digital signature, and that every digital signature in question traced back through a middle management proxy account that rolled up, ultimately, to a single executive authorization code on the finance side. He did not say the name out loud. He did not have to. Gerald Loomis turned his head slowly and looked at Clinton Harrow. Clinton began to speak. He said that any analysis produced in under 4 minutes, off 3 surface-level spreadsheets, was by definition speculative. He said that coincidences of this scale were inevitable in an operation the size of Oraline. He said that he resented, frankly, the implication. Dante did not interrupt him. He waited until Clinton was finished. Then he said, evenly, that the intermediate hubs where the unnecessary transfers were being made were not company-owned facilities. They were third-party subcontractors. He said that one of them, based in northern New Jersey, had been added to Oraline's approved vendor list 17 months ago, under an expedited review. He said the ownership filings for that vendor, which were public, listed a limited liability company, and the listed manager of that limited liability company shared a surname with Clinton Harrow's wife. The silence in the boardroom was the kind of silence that money makes when it is about to change hands. Gerald Loomis closed his folder. He said, very quietly, to Serafina that Helix Capital would be willing to continue the conversation about the bridge facility, provided that Oraline immediately stood up an internal investigation, placed any executives implicated by that investigation on administrative leave pending its outcome, and brought in outside operational oversight on a transitional basis. He said, almost as an afterthought, that he thought Mr. Mercer might be an appropriate candidate for the transitional role if he was willing to consider it. Serafina looked down at her hands on the table. Her knuckles were white. She said, I will accept that. Clinton Harrow began to say something else. Priscilla Dane, the general counsel, stood up and walked to the door and held it open, and two men from corporate security stepped inside, and they waited, very patiently, while Clinton Harrow gathered the small dignity he had left and walked out under his own power. The door closed. For a long moment, nobody at the table moved. Then Gerald Loomis, who had known Serafina Vale since she was 7 years old and afraid of horses, reached across the polished surface and patted the back of her hand one time and took his hand back and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that her father had not already said in a memo 3 years before. When Dante came out of the boardroom, Ivy was asleep on the small couch in the lounge, curled around her rabbit, the coloring book open face down on her chest. A drawing of a tall building, cross-hatched with careful crayon lines, peeked out from under her arm. Dante stopped at the door and simply looked at her for a moment. Serafina stood a few feet behind him. She did not interrupt. She had been watching him watch his daughter for almost a minute before she realized that the thing she felt in her own chest, underneath the embarrassment and the shock and the thin, clean relief of a crisis caught in time, was something she had not allowed herself to feel in over a year. It was not romantic. It was something more dangerous than that. It was respect. Dante knelt down next to the couch and lifted Ivy into his arms. She murmured something and tucked her face into his shoulder. The rabbit fell. Serafina bent, picked it up, and placed it gently into Ivy's slack hand. Ivy opened one eye. She looked at Serafina. Are you the lady from downstairs? She said, very sleepily. Serafina swallowed. I am, she said. Ivy considered this. Was my daddy in trouble? Ivy asked. Serafina went very still. She looked, not at Dante, but at the child in his arms. No, sweetheart, she said, and her voice did not quite hold steady, and she did not try to make it. Your daddy was the best man in the building. Ivy nodded, satisfied, the way children are satisfied by simple, true answers. She closed her eye again. Dante adjusted her weight in his arms. He looked at Serafina over his daughter's hair. I have not said yes yet, he said quietly. I know. I will think about it. I know. He started to walk toward the elevator. Serafina walked beside him, not behind him, not leading, and the distinction mattered more to both of them than either of them would name out loud. She pressed the button. The doors opened. Dante stepped inside. Ivy stirred and was still. Serafina stood in the doorway with her hand holding the door from closing. Mr. Mercer, she said. He looked up. The next time you come to this building, she said, you will come in the front, through the front door, with your daughter if you want, and no one will ask you who you are. Not ever again. He looked at her for a long moment. I appreciate that, he said. It was not yet forgiveness. It was not yet trust. It was something simpler, something older, the acknowledgement between two people who had misunderstood each other badly in public, that they were both going to choose, from this point forward, to see each other clearly. That was enough for today. That was, in fact, more than most mornings ever managed to be. The doors closed. Serafina stood in the empty hallway for a long time. 10 minutes earlier, the entire lobby of her building had looked at a man and decided, with the easy cruelty of people who had never once in their lives been on the other side of a glass door, that he did not belong there. 10 minutes later, the most powerful woman in that building had run down 32 flights of stairs in bare feet to ask him, please, to come back. The man at the center of both of those moments had not changed. His worth had not increased. His shoes were no cleaner. His shirt was no newer. The only thing that had changed was the willingness of the people around him, at long and shameful last, to look. Somewhere below her, in a private elevator descending through the marble spine of her company, a small girl sleeping against her father's shoulder held a rabbit with one sewn-on eye and dreamed, perhaps, of ceilings.